Good afternoon and welcome to Science Fiction Retirement Library. My 2025 reads ranked. I only managed to do 57 books this year, and only 46 of those were science fiction, and even 5 of those were trade paperback graphic novels type books as well. So I've seen a few guys that have done their tier rank already, and some are up to 100, 150 books, which I honestly don't know how I could ever achieve doing a more than full-time job. I'd love to do that. That's the whole point of the retirement library, right? But if people are doing 150 books, that's a book every 2 to 3 days or something, right? So I don't know. Unless a lot of them are audiobooks, I don't know how guys do it, but it's very impressive. So for me, I try and do at least a book a week if I can, and I did do that this year with 57 books, but they're not all science fiction. But I have been reading or choosing to read more science fiction now because of the channel, basically. So all good. Now, let's go one by one as quick as we can. Hopefully there's some things that you would like to read from my list. So the first book is by Guillaume Singelin, and it's Magnetic Press, and these are beautiful books. It's called Frontier, and it's about the exploration of space and basically mining and the capitalist kind of approach to what we can utilize space for. And it's just a beautiful book, a very well told story, quite cutesy pictures, but telling quite a serious story. And anyone that likes kind of, let's say, space opera, politics in opera, but also sequential art, check it out. It's not, in terms of the beauty, I would put it here. In terms of the story itself, I'd put it here. It was very enjoyable. Not the best story I've ever read, but it was just enjoyable to read it and to look at it, and it is gorgeous. And anyone that can pick anything up from Magnetic Press, I've got 2 books on here from Magnetic Press. They are just actually absolutely stunning objects. The second one is also a trade paperback, so I think it's six or so comics, which from 2000 AD for Halo Jones. So Alan Moore at his classic best. And if people don't know about Halo Jones, she's a really interesting, feisty space character who gets into all sorts of mischief. And it's just a real kind of rip-roaring ride. And I read Volume 1 last year, and I wanted to get Volume 2. Volume 3 is pretty hard to get, I think, or it's quite expensive. But this is just a really enjoyable space comic I think from the 90s, might have even been earlier. And it's Ian Gibson's art, who sadly died in 2023, a couple of years ago now in December. And it's kind of iconic in the world of UK comics. So check out Halo Jones if you like Alan Moore, if you like Gibson, if you like sci-fi comics. So the first science fiction novel that I read in 2025 is a great one, right? And what a debut by Alastair Reynolds. I'd only read Slow Bullets by Alastair Reynolds before, which is a kind of a thin novella. And I wanted to read this, and I finished this when I was away for work. And I really enjoyed it. I actually remember mentioning it on a video that there's no point in reviewing it because everyone's said everything there is about it. But I really liked it. I really got engrossed in the whole thing, in the characters, in Sylvester and Voliova, and the shadow, the simulacrum. I really remember the scene at the end when they're kind of floating down through whatever they're floating down in. No spoilers, etc. But really enjoyed it, and I think it gives me the wish to read more. And yeah, I can't really say much more about it. I think most people have read it, or most people really like it, and even like further books in the series more than this. But I just thought fantastic characterization, fantastic plot, momentum, with enough of kind of an undershadow, whatever you want to call it, or something in the background that makes you always question what's going on, which is the best in these kind of sci-fi space opera thrillers, right? There's always something going on. So a little bit of history, a little bit of mystery, and characters that interact together, and there's a little bit of tension. And I think Alastair Reynolds does that brilliantly in Revelation Space. I did enjoy Slow Bullets as well, but this is kind of next level, I think. So yeah, higher shelf. I could have put it here. My issue is it's not staying in my mind as fresh as other things. But I think if I did do a reread, I'd probably maybe even boost it up again. But it's definitely on the higher shelf of my retirement library for sure. The Nets of Space. This was kind of a little bit of a jokey read when I was away, and it's one of the 5-star paperbacks that I like, and I've got 7 or 8 of them now, really thin little paperbacks. And this is a really interesting one about kind of these cosmic giants that actually do literally throw nets out into space. to capture other sentient beings to use to eat to gain energy. And it's as silly as it sounds. But I don't know. I can't put it on a lower shelf because it's I don't know. I love the cover, but also the story's like probably objectively the writing isn't great, and the story I think from the '60s is pretty, silly and playful. But there's a charm to it again that I can't get. I can't ignore. Right. So for me, it will go on the middle shelf with the rest of the 5-star paperbacks, and I'm probably going to read a few more next year. So just a nice little playful novella, you'd probably call it. So the next one was my first Harlan Ellison, Pain God, and I did a review whenever it was, in February or whenever, and I was kind of close to blown away by this. I'd heard a lot about Ellison, and as a fan of people, like Bukowski and kind of some of the beatnik type writers, or the beat writers, maybe not beatnik, and even the music of Tom Waits and things like that. I was very intrigued to read Ellison because he felt like he was from the other side of the tracks, like Kerouac, Ginsberg, those kind of things. And I have to say I wasn't disappointed. And I did a full breakdown of all of the stories in here, but I have to say I enjoyed all of them. And the TikTok one, Harlequin TikTok one, was probably the one that sticks in my mind the most, partly because of the psychology of time and how I'm rubbish at it, in terms of past, present, and future, in terms of getting my jobs done. But just the writing, the construction, the intro, I remember the explanation of Ellison it's always kind of intellectually stimulating, or from what I've read so far, is intellectually stimulating, and it's made me want to read everything that he's ever written, especially in sci-fi, right? So this, again, is it top shelf? I think it has to be because of the impact it's had on me and the fact I went in with such high expectations and I wasn't disappointed, because Ellison's one of those writers that I held back. And yeah, didn't disappoint. So, good one. So the next one is Barefoot in the Head by Brian Aldiss, and it's not my first Brian Aldiss, but it is by far the craziest Brian Aldiss. And it's one of those books that you have to float on top of and then try to dive into, just to use a sea reference, dive into the sea to try to grab what you can out of it. It's kind of based on forces using something like acid, so hallucinogenics, to use within a war as a kind of a weapon against humanity. And what you're reading is certain people within that who are affected by that explaining what's going on in their life. So you're so disjointed a lot of the time, and that is the point, I'm sure. And it's very experimental. And there's some things that happen at kind of, you think, did I understand that correctly? There's a bit about cars and sex, etc. And you think, did I understand that, or is that one of the things that's making me, disjointed and as though I'm hallucinating? So I have to say, as an idea, it was awesome in the real sense of the word, and it was something I really wanted to enjoy. But I have to say, I either wasn't in the right headspace or there was another issue, but I just found it too complicated to enjoy properly. And I know that Brian Aldiss is an incredible writer, and I think those people that have really dived into this and tried to critically analyze it, this is, I don't know, not his magnus opus, but kind of one of his best. And if I had the time, or maybe I was studying and doing my English literature degree again, this would be quite interesting. But at the moment, I want to read for enjoyment, and it was a little bit too difficult to get through, is my answer. So the next one is I Am AI by A. Zhang, and this was again a novella or novelette, and it was about being creative in a world of AI, so very, very prevalent at the moment. And I don't know how I came across this, but it's such a small little pamphlet type book that I wanted to give it a read. And it's quite powerful. And the reason it's powerful is the protagonist kind of lives, it's like a dystopian world, and she lives outside of the cities, but she is actually a writer and gets paid by these automated kind of services for certain pieces of writing. And her USP, or whatever you want to call it, is that she sounds more human than all of the other AI writers. Um, and it's a really interesting, small but kind of powerful commentary on what it means to be creative, or a wordsmith, or to put sentences together, etc. In a world where machines can do it incredibly well. And I'm in software. I'm not on any AI projects at the moment, but I'm trying to keep up to speed with it in terms of, what's going on, and the potentials of AGI, etc. But it's impressive. And how do you bring the humanity, or show the humanity, in writing? And the fact that she's called A, and I am AI. It's just, there's a lot of layers to such a small book, and I was really impressed with it. I think it won a Costa Award or something like that, but it has to go on the higher shelf. It will be a recommendation to others, just as something you can read literally on a train or a short journey, and it will make you think of something. So the next one is a comic series, so six issues, I think, in one trade paperback. The Last Space Race by Peter Calloway is the writer. And it's a kind of a simple story where China, Russia, and the US discover an anomaly, a cosmic anomaly, at the same time, and feel it could be an opportunity for humanity. And it's about humanity's kind of race to find out what this is and how it could benefit. And there's a little bit of the competition. It's tech billionaires, basically, which we know is a real thing at the moment. And yeah, just a kind of a simple read. Nothing major. If you do like that kind of thing, like The Right Stuff and any of those ones where it's kind of a bit more grounded, and then in the end there's a reveal about what actually they're chasing for. So kind of a bit like Revelation Space, or even 2001, where something is seen and discovered and we need to find out exactly what it is. But yeah, and nothing special, so I'm putting it down here. In terms of graphic novels, these are more enjoyable. So my first A. Van Vogt, and I actually did 3 in a row. Now, I did do an Alan Moore short story collection in between, but in terms of my reviews, I did these 3 in a row. So The Undercover Aliens, The Changeling, and The Mind Cage. And I can't remember what I reviewed them at the time, so I'm doing this fresh again. But The Undercover Aliens, as my first A. Van Vogt, was just a very enjoyable read. You can tell it was again a bit disjointed, but the ideas are quite sound. There's like an ancient house on the hill. I think the original name is The House on the Hill. It's got an interesting basement that kind of gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's ancient. It hints back to hundreds, if not thousands, of years back. There's a little bit of telepathy. There's a little bit of there's deaths, basically, so it's a bit of a mystery of who dies or not. And I just have to say, yeah, it's again really enjoyable. Middle shelf is, I really enjoyed it. I want to read more by that person, but it didn't really blow me away. And the thing with A. Van Vogt that I've seen so far is really good at what he does, but he hasn't blown me away. But when you think of it in the context of when this came out, I'm impressed by the ideas. So that's The Undercover Aliens. So the next one was The Changeling, A. Van Vogt, which is a smaller read, and it opens with a guy in an office who kind of doesn't even remember who he is. A little bit by Paycheck, if you remember, by Philip K. Dick, or the short story that informed Paycheck. I know you can get Paycheck as a book now. And again, quite similar. The ideas are quite interesting, and I don't want to give too much away, but there is an alien presence within this story, which is obviously very important. So I have to put it the same. It was probably more disjointed. Let's put it down here. This one was a more realized read, like a fuller read. So the next one is a short story collection that came out a few years ago by Alan Moore. And I'm a big fan of Alan Moore, always been a big fan of Alan Moore, from Swamp Thing days, Marvel Man, obviously Watchmen, V for Vendetta, Killing Joke. I've got a lot of Alan Moore, and I've read a lot of Alan Moore, and he basically changed comics. And it was a kind of a really big thing for the UK to change comics. I did try to read Jerusalem, which is his, talked about Magnus Opus earlier, which is his Magnus Opus, and I didn't get through it. I brought about 500 pages in, 600 pages in, and it is awesome in terms of the ideas, set in Northampton and some strange things going on with this other dimension. But it was just too much hard work, and I'm gonna DNF some things, right? But I started that last year, so I couldn't put it on here. And I bought this Alan Moore. I think it was when I was going on a trip. And I don't remember much about it apart from I remember enjoying it, but I also I really remember his take on the comics industry. So he wrote a fictional piece that, for all intents and purposes, is not so fictional. And he changes names and he does these kind of things, but it's really interesting as a kind of autobiographical account of what it meant to be someone who was having such an impact on comics at the time. So I put that on the middle shelf. There are some science fiction tales in there, a kind of a little bit of horror, a little bit of the weird and wonderful, which is Alan Moore, and you can look up yourself all the different stories. But the one that sticks, which is the big one, and it's called What We Can Know About Thunderman. And anyone that just likes comics, you should read it for sure. That and is it Super Gods by Grant Morrison. Both of them are good. Okay, so the third of the A. Van Vogt trilogy is The Mind Cage, which I probably have to say was my favourite one. And the reason I have to say my favourite one is there's kind of an AI in it, which I quite like. Again, there's an impending doom element under the surface, and it's in a kind of a gritty city. And the reveal is slow, and it's basically also about, again, like taking the place of someone else. So flicking my mind into someone else's body and what that might mean. And there's even a bit of being able to change your face to be something else as well, which will come up again later when we're talking about Harry Harrison, which I quite like. I'm going to put this on a higher shelf. I don't think it matches these two, but I remember enjoying it out of the three, and I'm kind of doing relative scoring. If I had to recommend one of these three, I would recommend The Mind Cage. For sure. And it gives, again, I think, a good flavour of Van Vogt in terms of his themes and what he does well. Now, the next one is Olaf Stapledon's Sirius, and it will not surprise you that I'm putting this on my top shelf. I put it as my best read of 2025, and I'm still recommending it and still thinking about it today. And I've had a few questions and a few comments just about how kind of, I don't know if the word is placid, but how kind of it drifts along. Now, again, as someone who read a lot at A-level and my degree of things like Dickens and Hardy and George Eliot and some of the classics, and I'm a big fan of Steinbeck, which is a little bit later, but I like that. I like traditional language in a pastoral setting, with using some words that maybe aren't used that much anymore. So I love that betwixt is a word that I love, and I use it as much as I can, for example. So the traditional ye olde English I like, and I just really like the writing style in this, actually, and I think a lot of people find it boring, but this is definitely top shelf. I will give it a reread. I don't cry at many books, and I did cry at this. It might have been related to the fact that, I'm still grieving my father, or the fact that I've always had animals, or the fact that it related to Daniel Keyes' Flowers for Algernon, which is also one of my favourites of all time. A lot going on there, and I was away from home when I finished it, and I even remember where I was sat, what I was looking at, etc., the room I was in. So, yeah, had an impact on me for sure. Something that didn't have an impact on me as much as I hoped, or people suggested it would, was Philip Jose Farmer, and my first Philip Jose Farmer, To Your Scattered Bodies Go. Now, the opening premise, which actually the cover on the edition that I read is pretty apt, is a really interesting premise. So you wake up, you're like bald and naked, like bald head to toe and naked, and you have no idea where you are, and there's a strange character kind of prodding you and telling you, you shouldn't have wakened, or if you have wakened, giving you very limited information. And then you get put down onto basically just a never-ending river, and every so often something comes down to feed you and entertain you and maybe give you some smokes and other. It's a really interesting idea. And the fact that it's got historical characters in it also means that it could be something, I believe, quite special. But again, it just didn't grasp me. I didn't care. And there were some horrific things happening, by the way. Some of the female characters, etc. And, they find little groups together of different, even kind of different, not just different people in history, but in some cases like Homo sapien and then kind of Neanderthal type guy, right? So really interesting. I feel like I should read the next one just to see where it goes because people do swear by it. But I have to say at this stage, it has to be on a lower shelf, unfortunately, because again, my expectations just weren't met with something that is such a classic. Another one where my expectations weren't met was Absolution by Jeff Vandermeer, which is the fourth in the series. Now, anyone that's read Annihilation, which is the first one, I got recommended it from Mr. B's Emporium of Reading Delights many, many years ago when it was just first, I think it was just first out. I was recommended that, and I was recommended Wall by Hugh Howey way before it became, in this case, a film, or Hugh Howey's Wall became Silo, the series. And when I first read Annihilation, it blew me away. It was one of my honorable mentions on my top 10 sci-fi, and that was because the atmosphere that was created, in my opinion, was awesome. And again, it was the dread, a little bit like Roadside Picnic or Stalker, Tarkovsky's Stalker, where you're going into this strange place and the laws of physics and things like that aren't right, and there's strange things happening that as a reader and the people you're seeing through their eyes, you can't really understand. And I'll always remember one scene where there's many scenes like this, but they're walking down a staircase and they're seeing things on a wall, and then at the end of the wall there's someone writing on the wall, and it's just so eerie and really well done. And I'm a fan of Jeff Vandermeer in terms of his writing. Some of his ideas are crazy. I think it was Dead Astronauts, is it? It's Jeff Vandermeer that kind of, I don't know, it just blew my mind in a bad way, a little bit like Barefoot in the Head. But Absolution is book 4, but it's kind of 3 or 4 different perspectives of before, during, and after different things. And the characters didn't. There's an old guy in it that's meant to be the main character, is meant to do this big reveal, and it just didn't get me. I wish I'd left it at the trilogy. It's obviously interesting, and if you look at the front cover, for example, it's explaining some of how this Area X came about, which is obviously interesting as someone who likes that environment or the universe, let's say. But it just didn't grab me again. I could put it here because he is such a good writer, but again, I'm scoring based on expectation, and maybe my expectations are too high for some of these. But Annihilation was so good. The other two were pretty good. I enjoyed them. The trilogy as a whole. Recommend it to a lot of people a long time ago. But this one, I was waiting for it. I got it in hardback, and it just didn't hit it for me. Now, one book that did surprise me, and I did have expectation because it was a recommendation from at least 1 or 2, maybe even more subscribers when I got it in a haul, which was this little edition of Replay. Is it Ken Grimwood? I can't read it from here, but I think it's Ken Grimwood. And this is a story about a guy like Groundhog Day who dies and then gets to replay his life. And more than Groundhog Day and some of the films that I've seen related to this, it goes a little bit more into the emotion and the longevity of what that might mean, in terms of, and there's some more books on here about kind of suicide and what love is in a world like this, not just family, like, maybe a Forever War Joe Haldeman thing. What would you do? And most people would do the same thing at the beginning, right? I'm going to get rich. I'm going to predict the lottery. I'm going to get early shares in Apple, or I'm going to buy crypto, whatever it is, right? You do that. But then it very quickly gets into a more interesting human emotional side of things. And again, I will recommend this to others, as you don't have to like sci-fi to like this. It's kind of a clever thriller that's it's a page turner in the old way. So I don't think it's right up there with these two. But it's definitely higher shelf. And if I look at those 4, all of those I would recommend highly and have no worry about it, right? I'm pretty sure the majority of people who appreciate good storytelling would like them. So back to the graphic novels. This is Black Star by Eric Anthony Glover and Ariel Jovellanos. Sorry if I pronounced that badly. And I picked this up at 66 Books, which is like 60+% off, 70% off, and it's a really nice little hardback and a little science fiction story about scientists who go to an alien planet to find a life-saving flower, basically. And I think it's very independent. I don't even know the publisher. But it's a deep space mission with a struggle for survival and sanity. Um, yeah, I'm kind of comparing it to this. I think they're both very similar. It's such a quick read. The art isn't too bad. I'd say the art is better actually in Last Space Race. It's definitely better in Frontier. Um, but yeah, if you're interested in kind of a more biological, alien-like story, then Black Star is one. So, talking about expectations, not many came higher than Clara and the Sun by Ishiguro. Ishiguro wrote one of my favorite books of all time, which is Remains of the Day. Um, Also wrote Never Let Me Go, obviously, which I did enjoy. I actually found that under a pub chair once and read that. And I think I've still got that copy. But Remains of the Day was just awesome. So I knew that the writing was going to be pretty special. Um, Now, I was disappointed with this. Now, again, the writing was pretty good. The tone was pretty good. It's basically about a an artificial life form that's a companion for kids. And the first bit I really enjoyed when it's the Clara basically who's in a shop waiting to be picked up, waiting to be bought basically. And she's there with other AI entities hoping to be picked up by kids. So kids come to the window and then I want that one, I want that one, etc. Really interesting. And Clara, who the AI, her relationship to the sun is really interesting as well because it's she believes is what gives her her energy. Anyway, what she does is she does get picked up by a family, and most of the story is told between two houses, basically. A boy lives with his mum in one house, and a girl who then owns Clara in another house. And there's the bit I liked is kind of there's a bit in between the houses which is very natural, like fields and fields, and interesting things go on there. And it's got a little spiritual element, and it's got a little bit of humanity and loss and grief. But again, it just didn't hit it for me. And when I'm comparing against Ishiguro books that I love, when he's doing a science fiction book, that's like exciting times for me, and it just didn't do it. Now I'm going to put it on middle shelf because just talking to you now, the more I'm thinking about it, the more I'm thinking actually there were some clever elements, and the relationships, and just the parenting side of it and what love means as a parent and what you might do in future. So yeah, I think people will love it. I have to say, I think my niece, who I was talking to about it, loves it. It's one of her favourite books. I think maybe the age you read it is interesting, and it's really well done. It's a lovely edition. I really did like this kind of cover, which is two layered. But compared to Remains of the Day, I suppose it's hard to do that. I shouldn't really. Okay, what can I say about the next one? So, Animal Farm. The reason that I read this is because of what's on in the world at the moment. And it came up in a haul, and I thought, I haven't read this since school. I couldn't remember anything about it. And I'm sorry, but it still holds true now. Um, Anyone that, I'm not going to go into politics, but believes in a certain way of life that will save the world, have to read this. You can't just go through life like everyone knows that capitalism equals the end of the world, right? Everything is consumed and everything will be destroyed or whatever. But if you look at other ways of living or other ways of a humanity connecting and getting everything they might need, you have to read this first to really understand what humans' traits are and what they're capable of. And yet, it still holds up. I have to say, people say Orwellian this, Orwellian that for a reason. It's mind-boggling the age of this and the power of this still. And if you haven't read it, read it. It's very quick, but it's very, very powerful. Okay, in terms of other expectations, this Alfred Bester short story collection in the lozenge, and I did read it in the lozenge, and I've got a spare copy of the lozenge actually, so I might be selling that soon. The Dark Side of the Earth. This is, I think, one of the favourite collections of Stephen over at the Outlaw Bookseller, I think. And the one Stephen loves is the Flowered Thunder mug, if I remember correctly, which is two kind of time-travelling antique dealers who kind of witness each other, or they witness the remnants of each other being somewhere while they're trying to basically collect ancient and truly ancient pieces to sell on. I love Bester, as you know. Demolished Man and Stars My Destination, both really high up there, one in my top 10. So I really enjoyed this, and I would recommend it. Again, the stories are kind of melting in my head a bit, but I remember the feeling I had when I was reading it, and that's enough for me. Now, the next one, which is Playground by Richard Powers, is a little bit of it's not a hidden gem because those outside of the traditional science fiction community know about this, and I think it was award winning a couple of years ago, last year. And I'm not sure how I came across it. I think I came across it because the cover is basically a whale's tail with two faces in, and I bought it on that. It is basically a tale of a millionaire or a very rich man who's dying, and then also the sea and a South Pacific nation that also is having problems and politically. And there's a lot on conservation and the sea as a whole, but there's a really nice near future element that I can't say too much about because it's a spoiler, but there's a really clever narrative mechanism used which reframes the story as you go through it and becomes clear at the end. So I have to say this is probably, I could put it here. This was a surprise to me. I enjoyed it. It was really well written in terms of the descriptions of the oceans and the flora and fauna within the oceans, which sometimes for me is enough. But then when it came in with this little flick, this little twist, I'm going to put it as a higher shelf. It's not at this level, but yeah, I was impressed. And Richard Powers, I think mainly he doesn't write sci-fi, and I don't even know if you really call this sci-fi. I think you do call it sci-fi, but you'd call it near future, already here, maybe technology influenced storytelling, let's say. Okay, and now if you see from these covers, these Readers Union or SFBC covers, this is when I did my 10 book challenge, 10 in a row. I did have a little bit in between here that I'll explain, but 10 in a row, which I think I said at the time, if you're doing a challenge like that, it's probably best to have different editions because the cover does make a difference when you're just looking at the same kind of, not blandness, but it's, oh, am I reading the same book? Anyway, I can't remember what I put for these. So Avatar, Paul Anderson. I don't think it's my first Paul Anderson, but it's my first Paul Anderson for about 15, 20 years. And there's something quite nice about this book. There's the story itself, again, has a reveal that takes time to come. So it seems like just a space opera with relationships and conflicts and, problems going on and, things happening that are destructive in space. But there's a presence again. There's an unknowing, again, linking maybe back to Revelation Space, that I could put it here, I could put it here. I have to say I enjoyed it, but it didn't blow me away. But I disagree with the people who say Paul Anderson can't write. I think he can write. I think, again, pretty much a page turner. But also some of the ideas are really good. There's a really good idea in this. And there's one character that becomes very important. And you follow that character and think, this is really interesting. Like, what that person is doing through the story, and then the reveal helps you understand that. So I think it's quite cleverly done. So You Must Remember Us by Leonard Daventry was again a little bit of a little surprise gem, and the reason it's a surprise gem, it's nothing really to do with the writing. It's kind of a little horror, cosmic horror book. So there's a spaceship. It finds a derelict spaceship. It decides to check out the derelict spaceship, and then they come back with something, or something affects them on their return, which changes the flow of the crew's life forever. And again, some of the imagery in this book is still with me. And even towards the end, where they go to a new planet and the crew interacts with the locals, I've got the imagery in my head. Anyone, if you like Alien, if you like a little bit of horror within your science fiction. It's a small book. It's very easy to read. It's quite simple language, but there's some. You see the cover here. I'm not going to say too much, but the cover here, there's like a humanoid with like wires coming out. Um, it's an interesting, I think, unknown take on what humans might do to survive. Right. So I really enjoyed this one. Again, expectations. This was above my expectation. So next is actually Crystal Ship, which is edited by Silverberg, but it's three short stories or novellas from female writers. And those female writers are Joan D. Vinge, Marta Randall, and Vonda N. McIntyre. And they were the first stories I read from all three of those. Um, and I think the number one, I think I said at the time, was the Vonda McIntyre. She's the one that I'm thinking, I'd like to read more of her out of the three. And that is a story called Screw Top, which is basically about three people on a prison planet, and they've each got certain characteristics or traits or abilities that might help them escape. And it's just a really, and it's a, like this red hot, dying kind of planet, and it's just a nice kind of prison drama. The first one, which is The Crystal Ship by Joan D. Vinge, is quite interesting. It's about literally people who live in the air on a ship, and one person who goes down to the dystopian land and connects with someone who still lives there to try and find out the history and to gain a bit of spirituality, etc. Again, very, very enjoyable. Enjoyed it. And then number two is Megan's World, which is also a really interesting one where humans go to a world, and there's local aliens there, but then there's also another human that was there a long time ago who's had a lot of like cybernetic augmentation. So all of those really good. Again, I could put it quite easily here, but I'm going to put it here because it doesn't match to this in terms of my mind. But yeah, really recommend that. Again, lovely little book, three very interesting stories, and introduced me to three writers that I hadn't read before. The next one on the list is The Typhon Intervention by Douglas R. Mason. First book by this author again, I think early 80s. I couldn't do this one. This one, I really struggled with this one. It's kind of, I think, military sci-fi, but I feel like Douglas R. Mason may not be traditionally a writer, which sounds really harsh. But it's about kind of the invasion, and I just couldn't get excited about it. And anyone that's read it and I've got it completely wrong, then let me know. But that's one I won't be recommending. Yeah, there's a lot of kernels in it, and strategy, military strategy, and we're going to be taken over. But there's no intellect behind it. It's kind of straight up war stuff, which just wasn't interesting. Under Heaven's Bridge by Ian Watson and Michael Bishop was much more interesting. And Ian Watson is someone I've read before. Michael Bishop is someone I haven't read. Now, the front cover here is a specific type of alien, which a human crew come across. And they think at the beginning they're trying to save this alien species because they're actually, what's happening between their worlds could be catastrophic for them. But what it turns out is, it's not actually, it's part of their being. And it's just a really interesting story about how aliens can be, and how the human mind might not be able to understand it. And therefore, what do you do in those situations? Do you dive in and try to understand it, or do you stay well away? And again, some kind of horrific things in this as well. Maybe not so much as this, but there's some strange connections between the human crew and the aliens, and what that means, and there's a little bit of fear, a little bit of horror there. So yeah, recommend that one, but maybe not as high as You Must Remember Us, which was a nice surprise. So Road to Corley, Richard Cooper. Now I saw some people putting him on their worst of the year reads, which is kind of, it could be true. I'm not going to stop reading him, but Road to Corley was one of the most enjoyable books I read this year, and probably I've read for a long, long time. I think I was in the right mood again. I was in. It is a playful, short chapter take on a kind of science fantasy adventure, where something needs to be found, where there's something within someone else that could reveal something later on in further stories. But I just really enjoyed it from the opening scene, which I remember of someone being found who they think is drowned but has a forked tongue and what that means. And basically they find out he's a kinsman. And the whole lore of kinsman, the kinsman fight against the overarching regime at the time, and the kind of the quest to find XYZ whilst being chased. It's got some classic tropes. It was really well done. Very quick read, and I'm sorry I have to put it on here, top shelf. I'm saving the next books because that one excited me, and maybe I've gone over the top about it, but I really enjoyed it. The next one was my first Omni of the year. I did read other Omnis, I think, or it might have been late last year, but this was the only science fiction one, and it's Green Lantern by Jeff Johns. And anyone that, if you only know Green Lantern by the film, however many years ago, Ryan Reynolds, please don't judge it on that, right? Green Lantern from the 60s, from the Silver Age and onwards, is a very important cultural science fiction character. It's just we haven't done it very well in movies and TV, etc. Right? So Jeff Johns revamped this in. It wasn't the New 52; it was before the New 52. But this is an Omni, so 1,000+ pages and a big run where Jeff Johns kicks it off with various artists. And I wanted to learn more about Hal Jordan, especially, but there's other Green Lanterns in there. And again, I really enjoyed it. It tailed off a little bit at the end. Again, it's considered one of the best runs ever of Green Lantern, and I can see why. There's the Sinestro Corps in there, like there's the big baddie, there's Parallax, the big baddie, and there's huge, and I mean huge, cosmic battles, which the scale in DC Comics is pretty big, and I just like the idea. I actually like the idea of for each zone of the universe, there is a protector. I just like the idea. So again, some of you won't be interested in that at all, but for me, I wanted to dive into Green Lantern this year, and I don't know how many comics are in there, 50 odd. I got a lot out of it. So the second Magnetic Press gorgeous book on the list is by Matteo Bablé, called Shangri-La, and it's a space opera about capitalism. And what happens when there's still that kind of regime, even on like a space station or an extended living, like a colony ship. And it's a really interesting kind of satirical commentary on the class system, really, within a colony ship. And there's even like an underclass, which is kind of part animal. And it's about revolution, and just again a really interesting tale, dialogue, sequential art. The art's a little bit scratchy for me. In my mind, it probably wasn't as pretty as Frontier, but the books themselves are gorgeous. The production is awesome. The size is awesome. They're slightly oversized, and just look at that cover. Like that just dragged me in straight away. But Magnetic Press, Matteo Bablé is very well respected. Writer, illustrator, and yeah, really recommend this if you want to have standalone stories that are very sci-fi heavy, but you don't really know much about comics. These two are really recommended, especially this one. This one's a little bit more kind of childlike art style, and this is a little bit more kind of older and scratchy, but both kind of pack a punch in terms of storytelling. Okay, back to the Readers Union Science Fiction Book Club 10 of 10 challenge, which was Bob Shaw, The Ceres Solution. And like all the Bob Shaw I've read, I enjoyed this. And the thing I liked about it is there's a protagonist or a hero or a character that's disabled in it as well. So he's wheelchair bound. And one of the trigger points is he actually goes what we think is to commit suicide at this kind of high level. It reminds me of something, anyone that knows Clifton, the way it's described in my mind was like Clifton's Suspension Bridge, or just along from there. And what stops him, we think, committing suicide is he sees something. He sees someone appear and then flash out of existence. And basically what it is that's an alien race that's doing something within the earth, good or bad, we don't know at the beginning. Um, and he makes it his goal to try and find out what that is. And it was also like something like beautiful to him, like it was a female protagonist that kind of vanished out of existence. So this has to be up there. Here, it's Bob Shaw. It's not, for me, it's not as good as Palace of Eternity, which is probably my favourite. It's probably up there with Wreath of Stars in terms of atmosphere created. Might be slightly better in terms of I was more intrigued with what was happening. What is the Ceres solution, for example, because that is a key storytelling mechanism. So yeah, really good. And I'm going to read more and more Bob Shaw for sure. CJ Cherry, my first CJ Cherry, and I was very excited about this. I picked up quite a lot of CJ Cherry, heard amazing things. Was discussing this with some subscribers about the storyline to this. And Serpent's Reach, it's basically like a little bit like Dune. There's houses of different types of humans or humanoid, and they're different levels of, let's say, success and class system. And what happens is there's actually a house that's pretty much destroyed apart from one person who's the main protagonist, and her name is Rayen. And what happens is they're actually within this star system where with other alien creatures. And there's a species, species of like giant insectoid called the Marjat, who also have different tribes. Sort of like there's certain warriors, there's more thinking insects, etc. And they live in a hive underground. And there's some really good writing, and really atmospheric writing of Rayen going underground. Part of it was for survival, but also connecting with these different alien beings in the hive, in the tunneling system, and even meeting the Queen. And yeah, she then goes kind of on an adventure or like an expedition to recoup for kind of revenge, basically. And she also recruits what are kind of described as subhumans. There's a really good relationship with someone who becomes her assistant, but actually she shows him a lot more respect than he's ever had, and he becomes a very important part of the story. The more I talk, the more I think actually I enjoyed it more than I said I did originally. It definitely isn't lower shelf, and I will definitely read more Cherry. And there was a tone to it that I really liked. I don't know where this sits within her oeuvre in terms of the timeline, but yeah, I'm putting everything middling. But the more I talk about it, the more I think about it. There are some images that remain in my mind, and it was really good writing. It just lost its way a bit. She goes out basically to the outer reaches of the Serpent's Reach, and I just cared a little bit less when she was out in these kind of. It's more political basically, and I just got a little bit bored in places. Marduk. Now, Marduk is a strange little book. Ronald A. McQueen. I couldn't find anything about this book at the time, and I haven't searched since, but I'm pretty sure you won't find much about it either. Now, just look at the cover. Marduk is actually a humanoid, and it is a weapon. And there is a history there where this weapon was used for certain things, and basically the premise is that this Marduk weapon is woken up for some reason, and it's the alliances of the planets, of Earth, etc., scared of what might happen, and can we use Marduk for our own gain or not? It was quite pleasant, I have to say. And if I'm comparing it to these, it wasn't incredible, but it was quite pleasant. I don't really have much to say bad against it, but it's just it's kind of a nothing story. But there was a kind of an interesting ending. I kind of want to move it here. No, God, I'm going to move it here. I feel bad. It's not like, don't go out and buy it if you can buy it, and read it as though you're going to get blown away by it. But it's a kind of a few afternoons of playful sci-fi. And I like Bloodshot, right, from Valiant. It had a little bit of that feel to it, Bloodshot, where someone's experimented on and all they want to do is be left alone. I kind of like that as a premise. And then another nice little surprise is Joe Bannister's The Winter Plane. A little bit like Road to Corley. There's a science fantasy element to it. There's a guy that turns up at a citadel in a vast desert, and it's run by nuclear nuclear energy, right? So you know that it's something a little bit warped from the norm. And the guy that comes in is basically saying to a warlord, I'm here to maintain your energy system. You need to help me. And you don't really know what's going on at that time. And there's an adventure, and basically he kind of outsmarts the warlord, and then goes off with a troop of a motley crew to go to other places. And I just enjoyed it. I could have put it here again. Then nothing really happens in the end, but there's something. No, I'm going to put it here. There was just something quite pleasant about it. The tone, the flow, how it made me feel that it's sticking in my mind. And again, both of these books are so short, and one is horror, and one is kind of relationship satire. The main protagonist is quite witty, and I like how he plays some of the other characters off against themselves, like the ogre type character or the barbarian type character, and how they interact. And then there's a kind of a female character who's got much more power than she realizes, and it's him as a mentor with her, which I quite like. So a little bit like Nightwings in terms of the motley crew going on an adventure. But again, short book and just quite enjoyable. So Don DeLillo was my next one, and I bought this a while back. I might have even bought this like 4 years ago at 66 Books originally, I think. And I read White Noise when I was at university or just after university. So he's a very well-respected writer, and I never knew he did science fiction. And this, again, a little bit like Playground by Richard Powers, it's not traditionally science fiction, like it's not on the science fiction shelves, but it's about wealthy people who choose, even if they're not ill, for example, to go into cryogenics. So a little bit like, Futurama, where you go, I'm going to be frozen, and then I'm going to wake up when you've got the cure for my disease. So it's actually about a couple where a lady is going through this process and she's actually dying. And they decide, well, instead of dying, why don't you go into this world? And it's about, again, the mind being saved, how that works. So in terms of being frozen, it's actually kind of saving the mind. And then it's the husband who wants to do the same even though he's not ill because he's losing the love of his life. And then the story is told, if I remember rightly, through the son, and like little vignettes of what's happening. So, and it's also about, like, it reminded me, my wife does social care, about a bit like dementia and Alzheimer's and things like that, and what it really means. And again, I hate to put everything in the middle shelf, but it was not a gem. And I know Don DeLillo, I wanted to read more Don DeLillo, I wanted to read more classic, like well-respected writers doing science fiction. And again, it's soft sci-fi, but it's still sci-fi. It makes you think of what the current technology or the technology we're close to might mean to humanity and what it means to be human. So one I haven't heard talked about, I came across it randomly, I decided to read it, and yeah, pretty good. Okay, the next one, this is one I've been wanting to talk about for a while. So I read it on my Goodreads, or I added my update on Goodreads. I think I gave it 3 stars, and I had a few likes or whatever, right? Now, it's my first Adrian Tchaikovsky, and the first should be Children of Time, right? That's what people told me. But Service Model felt like it was shorter, easier access, more modern, still got rave reviews. I think it was up for awards, and I thought, right, now I'm gonna get a feel for what this guy's all about. And I have to say, for a lot of it, I was bored. And the reason I was bored, again, the premise is really good, the opening, and when I like Remains of the Day, this should be the ideal book for me, shouldn't it? That was my thinking. So if I like Remains of the Day or love Remains of the Day, this should be my ideal sci-fi, right? But the premise of the opening gambit of a little bit like City, where there's these old houses, mansions that are run for maybe a lonely human, but it's a service model or a robot which is actually running the household, integrating with certain hubs in the house and doing different things in the outside world. And the owner of the house, the human, dies. And the premise is that it's the robots that killed the human. Why? So a little bit of the Asimovian laws of robotics, etc. Now, the whole thing is you see it from the point of view of the service model, and it's about his realization in certain ways and his limitations because he's AI. He meets something along the way that triggers certain things. He gets callings from other things to do certain things. But I didn't care that much about the adventure. There were a few really good scenes. The scene where he finds the kind of the humans within the created world, or the zoo type. That's pretty interesting. But it just didn't hit me. I don't think I'll be recommending it. And the writing, again, while capable, there wasn't the flourishes that I like. There wasn't the language that I like. It felt, I've used placid before, but it felt middle of the road, and it bored me. I got through it, and there's some really interesting ideas, and the ending is interesting. The reveal is pretty good, but I'm sorry, I have to put it down here. Even when I compare it to some of these, it's not one that I'd recommend to others. I know that some people wax lyrical about it, and it's satirical, and it's saying many things, and it's layered. I get that. Like, I understand the intellectual side of what it's trying to achieve, but it just didn't do it for me. It also has to be a story that grabs you, right? And you have to care about the protagonist. So the main two, which is the service model and the helmeted one that he can't connect to, is what I'll say, without spoilers. I just don't really care. So yeah, sorry, but please tell me if I'm wrong, and let me know what I've missed, and I'll see if I change my mind. But it's not sticking in my memory at all. And at the time, I remember going, yeah, 3 stars is about right, really, for someone who's so highly rated. The next one is Thomas Burnett Swan, Moondust. Now, I have to say, the reason I read this is it's just a really nice little edition that I got in a haul, but it is very fantastical. It is fantasy. But again, I really enjoyed it. It's kind of set, I think, in the Middle East, or a pseudo Middle East, and it's about a girl who appears, and I think there's kind of brother-sister relationship, but they find out that she's got wings. And there was a really good comic series that I read a couple of years ago, which was a similar idea. And basically what happens is she goes away because she's a different, basically, species, or an uber human, whatever you want to call it. And the brother figure and his mate actually follow to try to find her because they're worried about her. And they find that she's actually kind of this sort of slave assistant within an underworld where there's lots of these kind of butterfly type people. And I don't really read stuff like this, but I did enjoy it. I have to say I did enjoy it. It's again, it was lyrical, and interesting, and I don't know, it had a feeling that compared to stuff that I read, it was very different to that, which I enjoyed as a break from some of the other things. So my only real fantasy of the year. Let me know what you think of that one. So the next one is Fool's Gold by David Hutchinson, and I got this hardback from Baggins, and I've heard a bit about David Hutchinson, and I've always wanted to read him. And he's not that well known, I don't think, and this is quite early on, I think, but it's basically a set of connected short stories to do with the technology of teleportation. So within cities, you've got like a gateway where you walk in to, let's say, London, and you walk out in Nairobi or something like that, right? But there's a physical cost that you pay, so that you can't do that forever, for example, but it's really interesting to do it. And what I found is some of the stories within the collection were really interesting. Like, how would having a technology like that affect something like crime? So I can appear in a doorway, I can kill someone, I can disappear through the doorway, and no one knows where I am, where I came from, where I am, where I've gone. That was really interesting. There were some other ones that just didn't hit home as well as that. So I have to put it as a lower shelf because I think I said on another video that it's pretty disjointed. It didn't really work, but the ideas behind it mean that I feel there's a lot of potential there. And the one about the crime and someone trying to find the criminal was really interesting. Okay, next one, my first Andre Norton, which was Starman's Son. And I think I read this one because people said that's a really good way into Andre Norton, Alice Norton. pretty easy to read. I don't know if it's a juvenile or not, but it's um, kind of less difficult, and it's more of an adventure story. So you can really get to feel how she writes. And again, I have to say I was very disappointed. And the reason I was disappointed again is it's a kind of a quest type tale again, where there's a guy who has history within, again, like a citadel, and is from important stock, but is a nomad and an outcast. Um, and there's alien species and things like that that he comes across to try to get back to where he was before. And again, I got very bored. I lost a little bit of focus on what was happening and found it hard to get it back. So I've got a huge Andre Norton collection I got in one big haul, and I'm obviously prepared to read more. But Starman Sun again didn't do it for me, and I didn't really care about the Starman Sun getting his rightful place back in the hierarchy, let's say. So I have to put that on lower shelf as well. It wasn't like there's no way, like in terms of Norton's writing compared to this guy, much better than that. And it's an interesting tale, but it didn't hit me. So that was my first Norton. Now my first Maltzberg was Guernica Night, which was a gift from one of my subscribers. And I have to say, I did check after for the reviews of this, and the reviews aren't great. But for me, this is the kind of thing that I love in science fiction. Now, the premise is that suicide is, it's like frowned upon, but like everyone is depressed and everyone is questioning it. And it's like a society where someone says it and then you've got like these groups of people, and per city or per area, there's statistics about people doing it. They don't call it suicide. They call it, I can't remember what it's called, but it's like a decision point. And it's basically you kill yourself. And there's an authoritarian regime, but there's also the protagonist, or the guy that you see through the eyes, is also a little bit of a misfit, a bit of a like a Bukowski, like a bit of a dodgy character, right? There's little bits about misogyny and how he's treating women, and he's trying to escape a certain part of life, or even escape depression with some kind of lifestyle that would probably be seen as like, sins of the flesh or things like that. Again, nothing really happens. It's like a thought experiment about a world where this kind of thing happens, where there's a regime that comes to you to say, did you know that your area, and you're running your area, by the way, in some kind of like church-like way, has an increase in percentage of people who want to kill themselves? And what are you going to do about it? And it's like authoritarian versus freedom. It's the whole idea of dignitas kind of thing. I just found it really interesting. And a little bit like Ellison, there's a certain way that Maltzberg is writing that just appeals to me. There's like a darkness to some of it. And obviously the content, the subject matter is dark, but there's a darkness to the writing. There's a grittiness to the writing. There's a way I feel that he's deliberately wanting to tell me something in a certain way. I don't know, I just get a different feel from Maltzberg than a lot of these, right? And it's again, the other side of the tracks, or the shadow. It's those kind of things I'm interested in. Okay, Caethani by Eric Brown. Now, I got this in a haul. I think it was Richard's collection, and I saw it when I was choosing the TBR. I saw the front cover, and I thought, yeah, I could do with like a first contact type story, and just go with the flow. This was a real surprise. I really enjoyed this. One of the reasons I enjoyed this is a lot of the dialogue is set in a pub. And they even mention the pint. I think it's a sales thing for Timothy Taylor. Anyone in the UK that knows about real ale, they know what Timothy Taylor is. But it's kind of set where a group of people meet in a pub. They're pretty bored with life, and they kind of set the world to rights. Now, what happens, you'll see in the front cover, there's this big shoot of light and then kind of a tower, is these, I won't call them overlords because Childhood's End is coming up, but this alien species comes down to improve mankind. And what they actually do is they can put something on their neck that when they die, they go off to either the home world of the aliens or to the starship, and then they come back like reinvented, and alive again, but with slight improvements, let's say, like they're kinder, etc. Um, and it's just what that means. And it's the thing I like about it is it's very grounded. Like you spend a lot of the time with people talking about what's going on in a pub. Like there's a guy that actually does like the collection of the bodies and delivers them to the hub or the gateway. There's another guy who's a writer. Um, there's another guy who's like a policeman. It's just so homely with a backdrop of wonder, and I just think it's done really well. It's my second Eric Brown, and both of them I've really enjoyed, and I'll do more. So that's a recommendation. I bought it for my sister for Christmas. This comes out after Christmas, so that's okay. And I actually got the hardback, but it was in bad condition, so I'm going to give her my nice paperback and keep the hardback. But I think she'll enjoy this as well. Okay, the next one was kind of just like a quick read that I want to get out of the way. And the reason I want to get it out of the way is because I keep seeing the Apple TV show advertised, and I've had All Systems Red, so Murderbot 1, in hand for months and months. And I just thought, let's just see what it's all about. I have to say, it's incredibly playful. It's a bit silly. Again, a bit of satire. Some of the dialogue is stupid. But I enjoyed this more than Service Model. I don't know if that's going to lose me subscribers, but the characters and the environment that's created, the fact that again you're seeing it from a sec unit, so instead of Service Model, sec unit's viewpoint, and the mechanism used to say, I've hacked my governor module, which means I'm no longer governed by the corporation that controlled me. I've actually got some kind of free will, and what that means is quite well done, I think. And it's very short again. There's not a lot of you can put into a book like this, but the way it's handled is quite good. And the characters around them, even calling a character Mensa, I found quite interesting, to be honest. But there's another character that has some kind of like Livewire in Valiant, can connect with machines. That gives a little, again, it gives some ability to play with things a bit more, where a human character can connect with the sec unit. The sec unit has no emotions, but yeah, really interesting. I have to say this is, yeah, middle shelf. Let me put it back down here. So I'll probably read others. My mum actually got me one, I think book 3 or book 4, but I'll probably read others when I've got time, and I'll definitely watch the show, because I think there's stuff that you can do with this that's pretty thought-provoking, I have to say, in a satirical way. I know it's playful, maybe a little bit like Andy Weir. I've never read Andy Weir, but maybe it's a little bit like that, a bit like The Martian. But yeah, good. So a little bit of a surprise. Okay, the next one is, I'll just zoom out again, is Zabrowski, the Amiga Point. Now, I was going to read the Something in Ashes one. That was actually on my table to read, but it's number 2 in Amiga Point. So luckily, I had this. And I have to say, I've got such a gorgeous edition. I think I said on another video that I find it hard to move the pages. So I was treating it with so much respect to not read it, because it's such a gorgeous edition. But I have to agree with Science Fiction Reads that Zabrowski's good. It was just a really interesting take on basically an alien species, a little bit like Serpent's Reach, where a whole species was eradicated apart from one, and that one person was trying to do his best to connect with. There's something in the background where some of the species actually escaped to a cluster somewhere in the middle of nowhere. The home world is dead, a little bit like maybe Superman, and it's humans that have done it, and this alien is, you're following this alien around in terms of some of the investigations, etc. And you do feel for the alien. You're on the side of the alien, not against the humanity, but there's a little bit of a colonialism thing there, etc. And I just think, yeah, it was again a nice surprise, a nice little book, and I will read more of Zabrowski, and even in that Amiga series. It's just a nice, well-rounded story, slightly different because it's the alien and the humans have been a little bit like, I don't know, War of the Worlds or something like that. Like, the guilt, human guilt, and what that means, and just quite enjoyed it. Now the next one isn't a novel, and it's not even a trade paperback, but I did read it and really enjoyed it. The Illustrated Book of Science Fiction Lists. Now I added it because one, it appeared on Goodreads. I didn't expect it to, but I kind of added it. And two is it's sparked. It's given me some kind of really nice little tidbits that sparked this idea for some of these quiz videos. And it's written in 1982. Mike Ashley, who from what I read, is quite a well-respected editor. But there's some real insight in there. There's literally some interviews with famous authors at the time, so early 80s, describing what their favourite books are, etc. And there's some surprises there. And there's also it's just factoids. So I'm going to do a few quizzes, maybe early January, just as a kind of a difference to my channel, that you can literally see, and it will say, here's a question, can you guess any of these? And you have to guess the names or whatever. So I have to say that's middle shelf. And if you come across it, like I'd never buy it on eBay or whatever, but it was in Ben's collection, and it's a nice little adjacent read that I really enjoyed. Okay, 3 books left. So Cyber Books was a recommendation. So I got this in a haul. I've read a bit of Ben Bova in my 20s. Asteroid Wars, especially Voyagers. I think I read Voyagers 1 and 2. Haven't read Colony. But this was Cyber Books by Ben Bova, and the premise intrigued me. So I think this was written in the 80s or early 90s. And we have the Kindle now, right? And we have iPads, etc. Back then, this is a story about an inventor who comes up with a book that actually visualizes text and also illustrations using. It actually hints at not just using slots like a Game Boy or something like that for different books, like you can buy the books, but also doing it over the telephone, so over the internet. So it's, what if you bought a machine and then you just bought the text that goes into the machine, and what would that do to the publishing industry? And again, I actually really enjoyed it, and the reason I really enjoyed it is something very different to what I was reading, but also we saw what happened with the Kindle and e-ink. You know, it's a forerunner for e-ink, and e-ink is an incredible technology, but it hasn't killed off the book. And looking back at when this was written and reading it now is looking at actually what did that affect. I'm reading physical books, right? I very, very rarely read ebooks now because my collection is physical books, but really enjoyed it. I think Ben Bova is underrated. It was again quite a jovial tale. It reminded me of what might be like a John Hughes type film in certain areas, the characterizations, like an 80s film. But there's something good. I could probably put it up here again, but it's quite playful. It's not hard science fiction, but yeah, just really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed and then you get to the legal premise of there's two fighting corporations of who's going to get this invention. There's a little bit of a love story, a little bit like Replay. Not really hard sci-fi, but it's a good tale, a good little kind of adventure. So the last two, Stainless Steel Rat, talking about it for a while. Harry Harrison, talking about it for a while. First Harry Harrison. I was discussing with some commenters again on Stainless Steel Rat. I looked up, should you read, or what's the best thing to read? Is it the best one which is published first, which is Stainless Steel Rat, or the first one chronologically within his life, which is Stainless Steel Rat is Born? I decided to do it on the first published book, and I have to say again, I really enjoyed it. Did I enjoy it as much as Caethani and Malsberg? It's very, very different. Like, I can't compare my feelings of Ellison and Malsberg and people like that with this book about Harry Harrison, because it's like a cosmic thief. You enter it and the action is already there. It's a cosmic thief being chased because he's stolen X, Y, Z. He changes his appearance. He goes to other planets. He does one planet, goes to another planet, and then he kind of gets taken on by a Space Corp to say, you're working for us now because you're too good as a thief, and they're all ex-thieves. And he's got to go and actually he finds out that a huge spaceship is being stolen, and he has to go and investigate it, and finds out that there's a female equivalent of him. It's so much fun. All I'm saying is it's so much fun. It can't be, here. The more and more I talk about it, I really want to move that up, but I'm gonna let it stew. the more I thought about Guernica Night and compare it to the rest of the things on here, this has a soul or a social commentary more than the others, but I'm not going to do it now. And then the last book, science fiction book of 2025, is a reread of Childhood's End. And the reason is I got this copy, this paperback copy in Ben's collection, so it triggered it. I've got the original Sci-Fi Masterworks hardback, which I think is the one I read, again, 20 years ago. And I saw on Goodreads that I put 4 stars when I first read it. I thought, I got a lot of things on the my top 10 of all time, and they said, what about Childhood's End? A lot of people love it. And I thought, I can't really remember it. I remember the premise, but I didn't. So I very quickly reread this. It's a very short book, isn't it? And again, really easily reading. It's very simple language in the 3 parts. And I've literally just finished this today. And I have to say, my 4 stars that I gave originally is kind of what I'd rate it now. When I think about the ideas of the time and the bleakness of the portrayal of this idea, it is very well done. And I feel what I'm feeling now is probably what I felt when I first read it in my 20s, which was, wow, to have that idea that's spanning that amount of time with the understanding of even the name of what childhood's end, the end of childhood, or the end of humanity, what that means. It reminded me a bit of how I felt about Blindsight, in terms of there's intelligence out there without empathy, and everything goes through the prism of our human feelings. And Childhood's End maybe was one of those first ones that said, well, why? Why are you thinking of everything from a human standpoint? Because there's stuff out there that is way beyond our comprehension. In terms of the probability of life forms, how many are going to actually be like us? And there was just something, the overlords themselves, the mechanism used to make them devilish was quite interesting, especially when it was so openly religion is dead and science is king. And then this happens. And I've always had that feeling that if aliens came down, that's what would solve a lot of humanity's problems, especially at the moment, We're just coming off the Bondi massacre and things like that, right? There's something absolutely horrific about this. It is so bleak. But then when you look at the overlords, and towards the end, because I've literally just read it, they say, and we're envious of you, because you as a species at least have a way forward. There's a lot of power here. So I have to say I'm very glad I reread it. And it's definitely on a higher shelf. I don't know if it would be in my top 10, even after the reread. I think it would be an honourable mention. I do know that people, when they first read this, it blew them away in terms of conceptually. So yeah, really interesting book to finish on. I'm now reading Podkayne of Mars by Heinlein, which is a completely different tone, but really enjoying it. So yeah, let me know what you think. Do you agree? I don't think it was the best year I've had in terms of science fiction reading, because I've read the Sci-Fi Masterworks, right? But I think there's a good range. I think it's given me some insight into next year in terms of my planning. I've got a TBR already on my analytics that I'm going to use for 2026. But I've discovered some that I've loved. First Harry Harrison, first with Michael Bishop, first Vonda McIntyre, first CJ Cherry, first Andre Norton, first Zabrowski, first Harry Harrison, first Tchaikovsky. So yeah, I can't complain. But yeah, I'd hope for a few more top shelf if I can next year. Thank you for watching, and if I don't speak to you, Happy New Year. Cheers.